It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello friends, I am Rob, and I am here to give my State of the Dungeon address. This is detailing the events of the game of Mighty Protectors that took place on June 18th, 2020. As we took up action once more, the party was together, finally. We had a very, very badly injured Muscles. We had a slightly tardy Sentinel, and Ghost. We had Rook, and we had Bulwark, all together in the security room just before the umbilical leading to the interior ship of the carrier owned by the mysterious black-clad force that they've been fighting against. So, at this point, Muscles was feeling bad. His strength was going to start to fade fairly soon that he had absorbed from taking in bullets from the guards. So he decided that it was time to head back to the boat. At the same time, none of the others really wanted to leave. They knew it was important that they get into the boat while they had a chance. So they sent Sentinel along with Bulwark to go, Sentinel to go up with Muscles to get to the boat. So up they went. At this point, the upper ship started to rock and sway as cutting charges started to separate the ship. They were getting ready to launch the interior boat. So as they they looked down into the hatch, they could see that it was beginning to separate already. So Bulwark went down with the lab coat in hand to see where the security laser grid was in the tube, and found that by dropping the jacket, this was one of many epic failures and amazing successes in this game. But he dropped it and it incinerated when it hit the invisible laser grid. So, to try to stop it, he went to put a force bubble to block the lasers so that the group could get by it. He failed badly. So he did create the force bubble, but he did not create it of a size to fit inside the tube. So instead, it expanded out, crushed the lasers, but physically blocked them from getting down unless he dispelled it, which basically wasted a good chunk of power that he couldn't afford to lose at this point. All he could do is hold his density power up and keep continuing on. This, however, came to the point where the gap in the tube started to widen. The boat was actively driving away. And in the case of Bulwark, he decided to just drop. Seriously, the fall couldn't hurt him with his density up, so he did so. The rest of the group decided to drop down as well. Rook tried to drop, but he botched and ended up falling on top of Bulwark. In his dense state, Bulwark just barely noticed that he had Rook draped over him, because there were 3 guards in the room with guns pointed at him. At the same time, Ghost decided that she could fly, so she whooshed right down there. So now it was 3 superpowered individuals against 3 surprised but determined guards. And the fight was fairly quick. It mostly ended up with Rook using his gravity control powers to drop one of the goons, and then go up and shock stick him. And then he did that total of twice. The rest of them, well, when Ghost blasts someone with her mental abilities, there's not much defense against it, and it does a fair amount of damage, enough to drop guards without much difficulty. So, the fight was relatively quick and uneventful. Also, at the same time as they were, doing the fighting and everything, Muscles and Sentinel had gotten up. By this time, Sentinel's player was with us, when suddenly Muscles' power gave out. And they had made it up to the topmost deck, to the crushed ruin of the forward tower on the ship, but he passed out from his injuries. So, Sentinel had an idea of how to move him because he's got a very powerful repulsor blast. So he started basically using his repulsor blast on Muscles as if Muscles was a very large shuttleboard piece and slid him along the deck using his powers. This led to some comedy as the boat was starting to disintegrate rather badly by this time, more charges having been cut and the boat starting to break away from the rest of the ship. So, Sentinel tries hailing Chauffeur, who is still in the boat. The boat has taken a little bit of a beating, but it's still mostly okay. Chauffeur had backed the boat off so it wasn't going to get sucked into the water being pulled into the hull of the doomed carrier, or cruiser. And when he saw Sentinel waving him forward, he started to move closer. Sentinel yelled something about dropping Muscles on his boat, and he didn't catch that part. So with one mighty blast, Sentinel pushed Muscles one last time and shot him over the side of the boat. Once Chauffeur realized what was happening, he did give his level best to try to catch Muscles in the best way possible. Wanted to catch him on the deck of the bow where the shock might not have punched a hole in the boat. Instead, what happened was he bounced off the outer hull of the boat and Muscles came crashing down into the cabin on top of him, punching them both through the floor of the cabin and pinning him in tight with Muscles. Sentinel, seeing that they were now driving away from the carrier, he decided it was time to leave this boat and go on to the interior boat, so he started running up towards the bow of the ship. So, since the guards inside the ship that the first group had encountered were suitably knocked out, they decided that they were going to have to get through the door. They tried with strength, but they didn't have muscles. And even though Bulwark is very strong when he's dense, he's not strong enough to break through an airlock-grade security door. So he could not force the door, even with the help of Rook. So instead, their other door opener was, well, Zyghost. Her power blasts are significantly, they're impressive enough that they can cut through interior hull walls. She tried shooting at the door, but she missed, fortunately not hitting one of the group, and instead hit the wall and punched a hole in it. They were able to see that to one side was a blackened room, and they could also see into the hall. Nothing at the moment, but it was an empty hall and there were some doorways leading out on either side. So she spent a couple of rounds shearing through the wall to make a large wedge that eventually Bulwark was able to bend and move out of the way. Once this was accomplished, the three of them kind of forced the hole and slipped into the next room. The first room looked like it was a supply room. They didn't really see anything of any necessity, nothing stood out, but they did hear some people who were in the hallway outside getting ready to repel boarders. Apparently they were aware that they had been invaded. So, to solve this problem, Rook decided to take one of the grenades, of which he did not understand, and threw it down the hall, which worked. He threw well. It landed in the midst of the guards and exposed them to a strong mutagen, which turned them into insectoid creatures. The strain on their system was enough to knock them completely out and squick out most of the party. So they came out. Now, at this point, Sentinel was running to the bow of the ship. As it was falling, he was rolling extraordinarily well. As the boat was ejecting, Sentinel jumped out and landed basically in front of the small raised upper deck of the ship. And he saw that there was a forward bridge. So he moved over to the bridge and attempted to gain entry. This did not work. So he decided to start climbing up it. At this point, the rest of the group had moved through. They had seen some of the rooms that were on the upper deck. There was an infirmary, for instance. Not sure why they would have an infirmary on the top deck. They just continued onward. found a few other rooms, but they also found the forward bridge. And they saw Sentinel trying to get in. So, of course, their door opener, Zyghost, blasted the window screen and blew it out. So now the group was together again, except for Muscles, who was shocked to consciousness because Chauffeur got creative with a spare battery and jumper and shocked him into a awake state. But he decided, since he was so badly injured, he was a liability more than an asset, and he went to go and clean up his bullet wounds and try to lie down for a bit. At the very least, he needed to get some power back, so he was effectively written out of most of the rest of the action. Chauffeur, on the other hand, now that he was free, wheeled the boat back so that he could be there for the rest of the group. So, at this stage, the party was kind of going forward into the boat. They found a communication center on the upper part with an extendable antenna. They noted this and moved on. They found a locked door, but not a high security one, and then a staircase going down further into the boat. They decided, since it didn't seem like anybody was really rushing to intercept them, that they had a bit of a breather. So they broke into the locked door, which turned out to be the pilot's cabin, and started looting it, really. Zyghost got down and got ready to go astral to investigate the rest of the boat now that they were inside the exterior force field. And as they were kind of looking around, they found, first of all, a very nice gun in the lockers of the the pilot. Apparently he has a passion for shooting, which they purloined. Several sets of clothes, lots of strange technological gadgets in sealed waterproof canvas bags. At this time, Sentinel looked through the papers on his desk, found out that the group called themselves Team Bravo, and that they had several rounds of orders, which gave them fit and purpose. At this time, they felt like they were fairly secure, but before they got to rest too long, they heard somebody moving through the hallway. They opened up the door and they saw, strangely enough, a young girl, teenager, in a bright yellow coat, bright pink hair, sneaking through the hallway. They snuck up behind her. She was not paying attention. She poked her head into the bridge and said, "Hey, you the guys who are fighting them?" And they got the drop on her. She turned into a two-dimensional living shadow and slipped into the cabin. When they followed her, they didn't see her at first. However, since Ghost was astral, she saw her, as she really was, kind of crouched in the shadows by the console for command, and started to talk to her. A disembodied voice. This girl has seen enough weird stuff over the course of the day, and she popped out from the wall, turned one of her hands into a bladed battle axe, and took a swing where she thought that the disembodied voice was. She didn't hit. The others talked her down from attacking, insisting that they were the ones who were fighting off the agents on board this ship. And the girl basically said, "All right, well, I can help you out." She was going to tie up some of the guards as much as they could if they were going to release her friend, who was trapped on the third floor, which was the security prisoners wing. They agreed. Quite frankly, they didn't want to have to deal with everybody at once, and they wanted as direct a route as possible to try to get their quarry. And it was about this time, too, that they decided to take over control of the ship. Zyghost came back, and she basically locked down the ship. Took control from the emergency bridge that had tried to usurp control of the boat from them, and she rolled extraordinarily well. She was very smart. So she locked them out, and she killed the engines on the boat, and now they were adrift. But they weren't going anywhere that they didn't want to go, so that was a good thing. So at this time, they start thinking about taking over the boat. They smash the communications array in the next room because they realize that with Rook, they've got a better communication than this ship actually has itself. And they proceed to go down to the third floor. The third floor was basically a hallway with secured doors, and at the end there was a set of doors again. There was also some strange camera pods on the ceiling, and the entire place just seemed a little strange in general. But they proceeded in, and while they were discussing whether or not they should start blasting all of the cameras, and took a look at them, by using some of the experimental weapons, Ghost found out that her little noisy cricket was actually able to send out a brief burst of energy that fried two of the cameras and had a huge range, but melted in her hands. Sentinel tried using his fancy ray gun and found out that while it shoots lightning, it didn't really do any damage to the camera, which he was a little sad about. At this point, the door opens on the far side, and somebody they had been warned about, named Ravage, came in. He was wearing a trench coat, he had a helmet on, and he had sword blades coming out from his arms. And he looked like he was enjoying the prospect of taking on the party. So, at this point, Bulwark stood in front, not having any power for his force fields left, but he decided that he was going to still be the person best fit to take the charge of this guy. Rook tried to use his gravity control, but just could not get a lock on the guy. And Saigo started blasting away at him. However, when Sentinel blasted, he missed completely and sent a blast through the doors. Now, every time he did, he had a 1 in 10 chance of ricocheting off and striking one of the consoles, which would release a prisoner. He immediately had the worst luck of unlocking the very, very unstable prisoner that the people on board the ship lovingly called Psycho. An 8-foot-tall mountain of muscle with long serrated claws on the end of his fingers. He kind of looked like a slightly smaller white version of Muscles. He came out and immediately looked at the group and said, "Food." Ravage at this time just took a step back and closed the door. He didn't want to deal with this and thought that it would be funny to let Psycho deal with the group. Well, at this point, Psycho started blasting with mental attacks. Again and again. He seemed to have a little bit of resistance to it, but it's a strong attack, and she was doing some damage. So he ran up and he attacked Bulwark. Bulwark took 2 of his shots, which was impressive. He didn't take any damage from them. Even when he got a critical and an extra free attack, didn't net him any damage, which made him sad. Bulwark survived the attacks from Psycho, but it was eventually Psygho's attacks, the mental blast, that shut him down. He didn't have enough resistance against psychic attacks to weather that. In addition, Sentinel's repulsor blast basically made Ravage's attempt to shut the door behind him foolish and nailed him with the door too, as he ripped it off the wall. So Ravage came back into the fight, just as Psycho dropped, which made him happy. At this point, though, Bulwark decided to do something a little non-traditional. When Rook tried and he finally was able to lock on a gravity increase on Ravage, Ravage kept moving. He was just strong enough to carry his increased weight from Rook. Not by much. He was very slow, but he turned that into a swagger. So eventually Bulwark decided, I have to stop this guy. So he told Rook to increase his density and charged. He went for a flying tackle, which worked, and actually knocked Ravage to the ground, and then the extra density made him a sandwich. Now, Bulwark couldn't take that kind of punishment for very long. The extra gravity was not doing good things for him either. But it was keeping Ravage pinned, which is what he was hoping for. Now, at the same time, a door got again opened because of a blast into the control room. This time, however, it released a tall figure who the group decided looks too much like Bob Ross. He does have a kind of a bushy hair afro, glasses, tall, lanky figure, just with a perpetual happy look on his face, even though he was locked up. He came out and he's like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And they were all like, "Great, you're the person we're here to get." Tom was their target. So, Tom released this golden bird made out of little mechanical parts to go and fly off. They don't know what that did. But he came out into the middle of basically Ravage taking his blade and plunging it into the side of Bulwark. This was enough damage to take him down and knock him out, which instantly turned off his gravity control. So, yeah, he was no longer effective at pinning Ravage down. But at this point, as he was trying to get out, Tom grabbed the rifle, or asked for the rifle, and he got the rifle from Sentinel, and he used his power to rework it and threw the device onto Ravage. It clamped onto his head and put him out. Ravage did not make his saving throw against the effect of the device. So, the fighting kind of stopped. There was a lone guard inside of the security room that one blast from Sentinel blew away his barricade that he was making, and he surrendered to the group quite quickly. They got to look at all of the different prisoners and started trying to make a game plan around them. Now, the various prisoners were a tall, rugged, bearded man, kind of dressed like a lumberjack in a flannel shirt and pants and lumberjacking boots. There was an attractive woman in a black cocktail dress in a cell. There was a person who was tied at wrists and ankles and suspended in the air by the restraints on her wrists in a room that was completely filled with light. There was a UV screen in front of it, and the entire room didn't have any shadow at all, which was interesting. There was a room with another person who was strapped down to a bed. The entire room was filled with a green glow, not from any of the mechanisms inside. The person was emanating the green glow. There was another room where there was a child, little boy, about 8 years old, just sitting in there with a couple of toys. So the group started making plans. At this time, the one girl came back, the shadow girl, and the group had decided they were going to free her because they agreed that they were going to free her friend. And so they opened the door and they said, do you want in? Do you want out? Are you going to be okay? Because they talked to the guard, and the guard said, yeah, she has to have a lot of light around her, or otherwise she starts to get hurt. But the pink-haired girl with extended a shadow. She has some sort of shadow control. And the girl with the blue hair who was strapped up managed to draw some of the substance of the shadow out and created basically edged blades that severed her bonds. These two are a close connection, and the group was reminded of Cloak and Dagger, which was not my intention, but if they want to go with that, go with that. The girl is sarcastic and not overly impressed by the group, but she was grateful to be released. And the two of them took off on their own cognizance. They've already taken care of a number of the guard above, so the group doesn't have a lot to really worry about as far as the armed guards. There's still some staff around, but, well, until they make a clean sweep, that isn't so much of an issue. Then the group makes a clean sweep. I mean, it basically comes down to normal people with guns versus superheroes, and several of the superheroes have good combat abilities that still were in perfect health, and between Rook and Sentinel, they could have taken out all of them. And with Zyghost offering fire support, it was over and done with. Wasn't much that they could do. So, at this point, Tom manufactures a device and heals Bulwark. It attaches to his wound, and he wakes up. Still feeling terrible. He's still in a lot of pain. But Tom has the ability to make a couple of these healing devices, so he did so. He later on makes one for Muscles, too, which puts him in a bit better shape. The group decides, again, what they're going to do. They found out that the tall, muscular man with the beard, contrary to type, a lot of the powers that people have been given kind of match their personalities or something else. This guy got the gift of being super smart. And it's to the point where he's considered the most dangerous person. And had personally, when they had a computer pad in his room, he had hacked into the rest of the boat. So they made his room completely dead and no power, and kind of left him in there. So they talked to him, and while he seems to be very intelligent, he does not seem to be totally sold that their benefactor is 100% genuine and harmless, and that they might end up regretting their association with him. But he's willing to help them since they freed him. They decided not to talk to the person glowing because they were told that his radiation aura will kill them unless they have force field, which 2 of them do, but they weren't ready to use it in an attempt to go and talk to this person yet. They also didn't want to talk to the woman in the cocktail dress because they were told that she has very strong mind control powers and that they're caused by sight, and they have special glasses for people who have to go in and deal with her, but otherwise she's usually knocked out before anybody does anything with involving her, bringing food in and the like. So that left the little boy. So they went in to where the little boy is, and well, Bulwark walked right in and sat down next to him and started talking. This little boy, Jimmy, is very, very, well, let's just say he's had an interesting upbringing. He's from Montana, and his parents were highly religious, very, very bigoted people who kind of pumped that into little Jimmy. So Jimmy is quick to use slurs and to tell people that they're going to hell because they are wrong and evil and sinful. He's going to be a special project for them. But, all the same, they found out that his power is to create imaginary friends. Constructs in the ether that can actually move things in the physical world. And he can create 5 at a time, including 2 huge giant teddy bears outside of the door that are apparently intangible. They didn't do anything to the group, but he insisted they could have torn Bulwark apart if they wanted to. So all of this was a little heavy for them to deal with, but for the most part, he seems to be a nice enough boy as long as you don't trigger him or get his invisible friends to come after you. And that's where we left off. The group is kind of deciding what to do. For the most part, the group seems settled on letting Chauffeur take the boat, which he did. They detonated the old broken down boat that they got out to the ship on. That went blub, 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 blub. And now they have commandeered this ship. They swept the decks and they put Ravage in one room and Psycho in another, one of the cells that weren't occupied, and they're going to make a go of it. They're going to try to head towards either North Korea, which is the closest place, going along the coastline of China, to eventually get to somebody that Lord Warbridge has a means of getting them shuttled back to Foxhaven in Canada. Otherwise, if they really were determined they could get to Hong Kong, this boat can take them there. It's fast and it's capable. But the circumstances would be easier for them to get back to Canada if they could get there because of some entanglements. But all the same, a shorter trip of 8 hours would take them to North Korea. So, seems like that's what the group is doing. And that is the details of the adventure. Stay tuned, and we will see what happens to the heroes next on this leg of Mighty Protectors. Thank you, and farewell.